Hello everybody, my name is Lisa Travis and I am a Texas Master Naturalist, member of the Blackland Prairie chapter, and I was in the class of 2018. I'm glad that you are interested in learning to identify trees. I think you will find that learning to identify trees is really pretty manageable with just a few simple tools. We're going to start today by going over a couple of very basic things to look for that will help you narrow down your choices and get a big head start on identifying a tree. The tool that we're going to be using is this Tree ID brochure, which you are free to print out from the link in the description box of this video. I created this brochure specifically for our Master Naturalist trainees, so the focus is on the most common trees we find in North Central Texas. When we used this brochure for the first time, which was last year with the class of 2019, we found that it would have been helpful for them to have had an introductory lesson on some of the basics in Tree ID before they started actually trying to use it. So that's what these videos are designed to be, a primer on the very first steps in Tree ID. In this particular video, we're going to be using only the front page of the brochure, which will help us break the trees down into manageable categories. If you have the brochure in front of you, you will see that it says Key to the Broadleaf Trees. And what we mean by broadleaves is really all the things that most of us would call leaves. For instance, the leaves of a pine tree, most of us would just call those pine needles rather than pine leaves. And the leaves of a red cedar are modified so much that they really are just overlapping scales, and most of us wouldn't even call those leaves. So basically, we're talking about the trees that are not conifers. So our very first step is to make sure that we're looking at a tree with broad leaves rather than a conifer. The good news for us here in North Central Texas is that we really only have one common native conifer. It's the eastern red cedar. So assuming we can exclude that tree, we can go right ahead with the brochure. So as we look at the front of our brochure, we see that our very first question is, are the leaves simple or compound? We are going to spend a few minutes talking about this question because this is a thing that beginners do get stuck on sometimes. A simple leaf is one that is made up of one piece, each one growing from the twig. A compound leaf is a leaf that is made up of more than one piece, multiple leaf-like parts. The majority of our species, about 70% of them, have simple leaves. Only about 30% are going to have compound leaves. So that's a good hint for you. If you have compound leaves, you've ruled out quite a few of your choices. So the basic definition of a simple leaf is a leaf that is one piece growing from a twig or a woody stalk. This can be a little tricky sometimes. For instance, on a black willow, the twig is very slender and it's not entirely clear which part is twig and which part might be part of a leaf. On a box elder maple, the twigs, the new growth is green and maybe slender, and that's not always entirely clear either. So the feature that we're going to be looking for is a bud present at the base of each true leaf. You can see the two arrows there pointing to tiny little buds just at the base of each leaf. And a related clue is the leaf scar. So the scar left behind when a leaf is broken off or when one falls off in the fall is very well defined. And when the leaf is gone, the bud is all the more obvious for you to see. So that's a good way to look for that. You can see right here on the black willow, this is a close-up of the one we're looking at the beginning of this section. And you can see, even though those leaves are very skinny and the twig is slender, you can see a little bud at the base of each leaf. So these are true leaves and simple leaves. Compound leaves, on the other hand, have many parts. You can have 2 parts up to 15 leaflets, like in this example. Rather than growing from a twig, these leaflets are attached to a rachis, which is a non-woody stalk, much like the petiole or stem of a leaf. Notice that there is no bud at the base of each leaflet. Here we're going to look at a close-up of just a part of a compound leaf. So we've blown that up, and here is the rachis with 1 leaflet coming out of it, and 1 leaflet has been broken off. So you can see that the little mark left by where the leaflet was broken off is barely even a scar, just a little mark, nothing definite like we saw in the leaf scar. Just to remind you of where we saw the actual leaf scar, there was a definite mark. You could see the outline, the veins, and the bud was very obvious and visible. You don't see that at where a leaflet has been broken off. So the next question we're going to be looking at on the brochure is, what kind of leaf attachment does your tree have? Is it opposite or alternate? Opposite is when there are 2 or occasionally more leaves growing at the same level, at the same node, exactly the same place on the twig on opposite sides. Alternate is when there's only 1 leaf growing at each node, and a little bit higher there'll be another leaf, a little higher another leaf. This one is usually pretty straightforward and doesn't trip people up too much unless they are looking at a compound leaf and looking at the leaflets. So sometimes your leaves might be opposite, but the leaflets could still be alternate or vice versa. So that's why we determine first whether we have a compound or simple leaf, and then you want to be looking at the leaf itself, whether it is attached oppositely or alternately. So we're considering whether trees have opposite leaf attachment or alternate leaf attachment. Here's an example of opposite. You can see how each leaf is opposite its counterpoint. They're both at the exact same level. And here is alternate leaves. You can see how there's only 1 leaf at each level. Then on the opposite side, a little bit higher is another leaf. And on the other side, a little bit higher is another leaf. It turns out that only about 20% of our common tree species in North Texas have opposite leaf attachment, and the other 80% then have alternate leaf attachment, which is very good news when you find a tree with opposite leaf attachment, because you have ruled out 80% of your choices. There are so few trees with opposite leaves, it is worth your time to memorize that handful of trees that has opposite leaves so that you know what your choices are when you find that. There are several different acronyms or mnemonics for remembering the trees with opposite leaves. The one that we use is damper. D is for dogwood. The dogwood that we have around here is roughleaf dogwood. Different ashes that occur around here. M is for maple. The only maple that we have here is box elder maple. A lot of people just call it box elder. Some people call it ash leaf maple. Some people call it box elder maple, all the same tree. P is for privet. We have several species of privets here. Unfortunately, these are all invasives. And we have at least 3 common species of privets here, so it's definitely worth your time to learn to identify those. And R is for rusty blackhaw. This is a common native tree that's a good tree. We don't use E in the brochure, but you could remember that E is for elderberry and elbow bush. Those are 2 common bushes around here. They're not actually trees, so they're not in the brochure, but remember those. So now that you have answered just those 2 questions, you have broken down the trees into 4 groups. You have compound leaves oppositely attached, which makes up about 10% of our tree species, about 4 or 5 species. Simple leaves oppositely attached makes up another 10%, also about 4 or 5 species. The reason that there's not an exact number, some species, some people lump them together, some people split them. So it's not an exact number, but 4 or 5 is a good guideline. Compound leaves alternately attached. There are a few more of these, about 20%, about 9 or 10. And then the remainder, simple leaves alternately attached, you can probably guess that's going to be about 60% of our trees. So if you find a tree that's simple leaves alternately attached, you may still have a ways to go in figuring out the ID, but the others you have a big head start. And next time we'll be talking more about ways to divide down that big group of simple leaves alternately attached. The next video, we'll start using the rest of the brochure and we will practice actually identifying some trees from pictures. If you don't have a copy of the brochure, you would definitely need to print it out before you watch the next video. Print it out on legal size paper on 2 sides, use a Z fold, and you will be ready to go.